Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Sensiphilly Sparring Partners webinar, How AI, ML, and GenAI Can Increase Network Efficiency Today. Our speakers are Blake Hlavaty, Director of Global Network Software Offers at Fujitsu Network Communications, Monica Paolini, Principal at Sensiphilly, and I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I'll be moderating our debate today. In Sparring Partners, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video. We'd like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation, so please share your comments and questions using the chat and Q&A functions of the Zoom taskbar. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they go along, as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So there's no need to hold your questions until the end. And with that, I will hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome you all, you in the audience. And as always, it's a pleasure to be here. And this is, as you might have noticed, Sparring Partners on a recurrent theme. I'm writing a report on this topic on AI and GenAI driven automation in wireless networks. We already had one on this topic in February, and there's going to be the next one on April 5th. And there will be more announced as we get the dates settled. And the reason for that is because this is really a really hot topic. And there is good and bad about it, in the sense that it's a great thing to finally talk more about automation, more about AI and GenAI. However, there is also a sense of hype, a sense of the dangers and the challenges, and also how are we going to be really using it to our advantage? This is not to say that this is not a huge opportunity. The question is that how to benefit from it. So if you notice the title today, there are different parts. There is AI, ML, and GenAI, and we're going to talk about the different roles in automation. We talk about network efficiency, which is a specific way to use those tools. You can use AI, GenAI for other things as well. But also, I would like to pay attention to the fact that we also mentioned today. So clearly, there is a long-term role for AI, GenAI, and ML. However, the question that a lot of us are facing today is, where are we today? Where are we coming from? What have we done so far? What is available today? And then what is the outlook in the future? And so I am very happy to have Blake with me today at Fujitsu, because he's really working on it. And this makes a big difference, because oftentimes the message is such a high level that it's really unclear what is the benefit here. Blake is really working on this. So he's going to give us a concrete view of what he has been working on so far, what he hears from clients, and what we're going to be doing next. So it's going to be more concrete. We're going to try to stay away from the hype, but at the same time embrace the change. And I would also like to send you a link to a previous interview that I did with Fujitsu that was part of a previous report on energy efficiency. And this is because we're going to be talking a little bit about that as well today. And so that's relevant. So Blake, with that, thank you so much for being with us today. It's great to have you in Sparring Partners.
Hey, thank you so much, Monica. Glad to be here.
So, as I said, I already put you on the spot. We're doing this, so no hiding here. But why don't you give us an introduction in terms of what you've been doing, what you've done, you're doing, and plan to do at Fujitsu?
Sure. Yeah, so currently I'm working as the head of global network software offers at Fujitsu. So my team develops and licenses software, right? Control and analysis optimization software that we sell to network service providers. So I've been at Fujitsu now for like 12 years, and I kind of started in optical network design, and I've been back and forth between sales and product management. I kind of cut my teeth on SDN with the Open ROADM project. Maybe you're familiar with that. And more recently now, working in the ORAN architecture components like SMO and RIC, maybe some of those terms the audience is familiar with, and then also in AI ML and how that works not only in wireless and SMO and RIC, but also in the transport networks, where Fujitsu has an additional legacy and heritage there. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. No, and that's good because you have a broad view over not only what you do at Fujitsu, but what is that we're doing generally as an industry in wireless. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is that Fujitsu is doing in this area. Clearly, you are not new to automation, and you're not new to also AI and ML. You're probably more new on Gen AI, but that's everybody is
Maybe all of them.
like that. But can you tell us a little bit, how are we going to where we are today, and what's happening now at Fujitsu?
So from Fujitsu, and maybe we'll take the automation piece there, and start with that, and we'll build on it. So from an automation perspective, I mean, it kind of, one of the big things that Fujitsu has been focused on is in open networking, and I think that's a pervasive concept across our transport and wireless technologies. And that's really, that's a big part of getting to automation. And I think it becomes even more important with as new technologies come in, like AI and ML. If you're really limited to a certain vendor, or don't have a strong ecosystem to drive that technology, then it becomes pretty limited in what you can do there. So that's been a big part of Fujitsu's strategy for many years now, going on a decade. Really pushing in for open networking, and a big part of what we're doing in our engagements with like the ORAN Alliance and pieces there. So that's kind of the foundation where Fujitsu has played, both from like direct network access and management. Maybe we've used the term like network abstraction. Today we'll talk about data normalization, but you have to have access to all the data that's being produced by the network, and you have to have access and be able to manage and provision the devices. So that becomes an important layer in this process. And then on top of that, we can then build the applications that are going to do the analysis and the AI ML policies that we're going to use to make changes in the network. So just very high level, that's some of the areas where Fujitsu plays there.
Now, I want to get back to you at the role of openness and how does it relate to automation. But before we do go there, just sort of to set the terms clear here. Sometimes people you see, they just talk about Gen AI, but really they mean AI, and or they talk AI, but really they mean ML, or vice versa, whatever. So how do you see the three of them playing? What's the relative role? Sort of, if you just sort of introduce to that topic.
Yeah, through readings, and kind of there's a lot of opinions out there. One of the kind of frameworks that's helped me think about these, so with like machine learning is it's kind of it's the brain of this process. It's the analysis. The statistical analysis is happening. It's where we're going to take the raw data and we're going to derive some knowledge or information out of it, right? So that's the number crunching. It's the neural networks. It's classification models. So that's really where the machine learning plays. And then AI is kind of the muscle. That's where the action happens. So based on this analysis and this information that we've derived, now we need to take an action or make a decision based on that. So that's where AI, in the algorithm, the policies behind it, they're going to use the information to take an action in the network. So the next step, with generative AI, it's all about content creation. It's taking, learning from large data sets and be able to generate new ideas or content based on that. So we see the applications of this in our daily lives. It's all over the news, right, with ChatGPT and the other players in this field, whether it's language content or video or picture content. So we start to see it generating there. At least those are the first applications that we're seeing. So in general, that's sort of the differences I see between it. I think in general we use the AI term. I hear it used to kind of cover everything. Oh yeah, AI. But some of the components of that, maybe GenAI is a little more specific, but machine learning is a very important role in this that maybe gets overlooked sometimes, right, from performing that analysis of the data in the network.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, sometimes people think about traditional AI or traditional machine learning as if it were things from the past, but so we just really start scratching the surface there. It's like there's so much. We still use them in a very limited fashion. Now, in terms of how they're useful in wireless or in telecoms, what would you say that the differences are? Clearly ML and AI are very different than Gen AI, but can you give us like a few like sort of use cases, and then we can go deeper into that?
Sure. So for AI and ML, Fujitsu, I think really, maybe 5-6 years ago, started putting a lot of effort there. And I think the traditional AI hype was kind of then, right? It was kind of coming in, hey, we're all going to do AI and ML. I think a lot of, and in telecom, you see that there's the interest and the hype, and then as the hype comes down, the implementation starts to come up, right? So I think we're seeing that with traditional AI. We may be past what the big hype that was coming up, but we're kind of getting to the point now where we're implementing that. And Gen AI is just it's creating the interest in AI in general. So it's not only bringing the interest to what's happening with Gen AI, but also with use cases related to more traditional AI and ML. This is going to be a iterative or a step-by-step adoption. I don't think, especially service providers, network operators, mobile network operators, carriers, it's going to take time to develop confidence in the technology, right? We tend to be a risk-averse industry, I think, given the nature and the importance of our function. You can kind of see it in different steps, and it probably starts with just analysis, right? You can do a lot where you're not directly impacting the network. You're not relying on a machine to provision your network, as an example, but you can derive insights from that data, and using machine learning to gain those insights, I think, will kind of be the first step, and that's where some of our early use cases are really focused.
Yes. So, like with Gen AI, a lot of people seem to be working on the subscriber facing or staff access to information more than, say, network planning.
Right.
So how do you see in terms of like, what areas are going to be the ones that are what basically, where are the low hanging fruits here?
Yeah.
And what is that is going to take a little bit longer?
Yeah, for Gen AI, right? Yeah, like kind of chat interfaces we see today, kind of improving in customer experience. I think internally, like operations, at the operations level for network operators, like troubleshooting efforts. You have an issue in the network. You have pages and pages of technical documents that could be from multiple vendors. You're trying to find through that what the issue is. If you could, if you can enter text or ask a question and then it surveys and like a large language model that could index that data and then bring you what the solution or get you going in the right direction, right? You can kind of see how that could accelerate some of the operations and save a lot of time and efficiency from the network operator. So I feel like that's the kind of area we'll see for low-hanging fruit, where these type of maybe kind of an internal interface for operators who are engaged in troubleshooting use cases.
Now, I would like to remind the audience that we do not have a final Q&A. So if you have any questions, fire them now, and you have the opportunities to hear right away from Blake or me, depending on what the question is, to get an answer to your question. So go ahead and send the questions now if you can. Now, every time you talk about this lately, and then we can maybe talk a little bit more about automation specifically, the issue comes up about hallucination, reliability, security. How much of an issue is this? Is it just like sort of a growing pain that we're not as good as we could be, or is it a fundamental problem of using AI or Gen AI?
Yeah, maybe let's start with like kind of reliability. I think for some of the early use cases, there will be some willingness, to, like, if you're doing analysis as an example, and you're looking to gain efficiency in the network, or you're trying to isolate a root cause, and it's not 100% accurate out of the box, right? I think there will be some willingness for adoption there, and kind of flexibility. It's going to take time for the models to get trained, and the accuracy will improve, right? But you can still derive benefit, even if it's not, the first try didn't get you there. If the second try does, then it still saved you time and optimized your operations. So I think building confidence is going to be really important for the operators, and that's going to take time, and it's going to be steps. So like kind of I said first, maybe the first thing is just to analyze the data. Well, let's get that in, and let's take some time and build that confidence. Once I see the confidence in the analysis and the information that I'm getting, yep, it's giving me very high accuracy that this is actually the cause of my outage, or this is the reason I'm not obtaining the efficiency I need. Now maybe I'll take the next step, right? And that's where maybe Gen AI comes in, and it suggests a solution or a resolution to the issue that I'm seeing. Now maybe you're not quite ready to have the system actually implement the change, but it's told me what an issue is. It's given me a recommendation for resolution, but I still have the human step in there, right? So I think that reliability is going to come over time, and as the operators get more confident in the reliability of the AI systems, then they'll be more willing to move forward with automation.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that the question is, and I think you described very well how you're going to build the trust. It's not going to be showing you on one day this is perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It's just, I guess the learning goes on both ends, in the model and in the users at the same time, and then you learn how to use the output and how to refine the output and how to, I would imagine, customize the model so that it works for what you're trying to do. So it's a process rather than sort of a one-day decision. We'll move to AI or an AI-based automation, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now, what about hallucinations? So I guess it's part of the issue here, but it's a little bit more specific in that it is sort of driven by the fact that we all played with Gen AI online, and we all have some experience of what hallucinations are. And when you see them, you say, oh my God, if this happens in a network, that's terrible. It's just unacceptable. And well, we're trying to do different things, and it'll be a different model, a different version of the model. So is it a good way to go to extrapolate what we see when we play with ChatGPT online to what is going to happen in the network?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the early use cases around like ChatGPT, and I think even in the general public using it, right? We're testing it now, right? And we're getting the feedback, and it's learning, and every iteration is going to be improve. I mean, we don't know what we don't know in some extent, to some extent with this technology. I think the network operators are watching this cautiously, right? So again, they're gonna look where it can add value, but they're going to put like an air gap right between that technology and their network for some time, I think. Again, if it's somewhere that it's providing insight or recommendations, but I have a human who's going to process and filter out, right, those hallucinations. Somebody who's got can practically assess that and not let those types of things impact the network reliability. I think that'll be where it stands, and it'll take a little more time for them to get to the point where they would take direct action based on that, because of these types of reasons, right? Because what we see happening with GenAI and things like hallucinations occurring.
Now, let's talk a little bit more about automation, because so we use AI, ML, and GenAI for they're tools, they're enablers for
Right.
automation, and other things as well, obviously, but automation, because we want to improve network efficiency. Do you see much of a change in what are the drivers in that area? I had a panel yesterday on pretty much the same topic, and there was a panelist from AT&T saying that the focus now is more on the OpEx side and on the performance side. I would say that the two go hand in hand together, because if you improve performance, then you improve the OpEx or the return on investments. Do you see any change in what are the drivers, and what do you think that the drivers are?
Yeah, the drivers for network automation. I think some of the drivers that we've been aware of for several years now continue, but we're going to get to that inflection point, right? That will drive some of the network operator spending pretty soon. The demand for bandwidth continue to goes up, but customer willingness to pay stays pretty flat, right? So you've got to find a way to cut costs to drive profits. The telecom workforce has, there's going to be some aging out and new people coming in, and are they going to have all that background to be able to support? Are we going to have as big as staffs that we've seen in the past? Probably not. I think those will continue to be some of the drivers. In addition to that, just the complexity of the network continues to increase, both from the wireless side down to the transport, the way we're layering things. And it's all to drive more bandwidth and new use cases. But with that, obviously comes some complexity, and with that comes cost. So how do you address that? And this is really what will drive automation in the next few years to get to the point where, you have a staff that is more proactive in the way that they manage the network, and maybe spending less time reacting to issues as they come up, and because that can be very time consuming. So through the automation effort, I mean, one of the use cases we're looking at right now is just like doing software updates to the nodes in the network. And that can be a very tedious process, right? You kind of try one by one, especially early on in the process. But if we can automate that, we have performance metrics in place that recognize when there's a problem and automate the back out. Well, that saves a lot of time in performing actions like that, like doing software updates in the network. So I think those will be some of the drivers, and ultimately it is, automation is about reducing cost, but also about reducing, incidents and improving reliability, just because we can be more repeatable in the way that we operate the network.
No, absolutely, and that I think that the emphasis you put on complexity is spot on. Because initially, automation seemed to be something that you can choose whether to have it or not, but now we got to a point where the complexity is such that automation is no longer a choice. It's you have to automate. But at the same time, what you want to do is to provide operators, I would imagine, a solution that reduces the complexity. So not only manages, but sort of makes things easier to the extent that we can. So what is that you specifically do at Fujitsu that makes it helpful for the operators?
Yeah. So I think this is really important when you think about even adopting new technology and how will the customer adopt it, right? And not just at the level you're selling at, the business or the P&L, the budget owner, but really the person who's using the software day to day. How are they going to adopt new technologies? So this becomes really important in making these new steps. And to your point, it can't be harder than the way that they do the job today. I think when I have issues with my word processor application crashes on me, suddenly I have a lot of empathy for my customers, right? They're trying to do their job, they're under the gun, right? And they need their tools to work so that they can do it. So that becomes really important. So how they do their process job day to day and how they'll adopt new technology going forward, I think is really important as we develop these products. We need to understand that. Otherwise, we slow the whole adoption process down. If the end user is struggling to adopt the technology, or they're struggling to see the benefits, at least some early wins, then that really slows down, and it just adds complexity, to your point, to their day-to-day job, which is what we have to avoid, right? We have to get to that point where we've reduced it. So I think that's something kind of for the fellow product managers out there, right? You have to really think about how the end user is going to adopt and implement the new technology. Oh,
Sorry, here.
yeah.
As I was saying, with automation, this is hard because you're basically offering your customers something new. So it's not just a performance improvement, it's just a different way to do things that require different organizational structure, skills from the employees' perspective as well. Now, let's talk, as I said before, I wanted to go back to the network openness. And that clearly, the more open the network is, the more complexity you have. So you add some complexity because you have more vendors, you're trying to do more things. You might have, as we go forward, we have more interfaces, more services. Everything is kind of more of everything. But can you tell us specifically, how does automation fit in an environment or in an ecosystem where you have more diversity? So especially with open RAN and disaggregation, how is that, does that make automation more challenging, but maybe also more important? Or has it a different role?
Yeah, so automation is going to be, inevitable and needed, as we kind of talked before. And in open networks, you're right, we're essentially breaking everything apart and putting it back together, right? With different people working in different areas. Now, this is something Fujitsu's been doing for several years. We have a lot of experience actually working with what would previously be direct competitors, right? To do integration, not only from a node level, but from software level, and having to work across that. The interfaces become obviously very important, right? And standardizing to those, I know within ORAN, there's been a lot of work in defining, and more work that needs to be done in refining and defining those interfaces. And there's got to be agreement among the ecosystem around how the interfaces are going to be built, and then a commitment to implement them. We've seen, as we've been starting to work and get more partnerships in the ecosystem, there are different levels of adoption of those standards and the standard-based interfaces, and it makes it very challenging when you don't have it. But there also has to be a willingness that once you start to work together, to make the necessary changes to interface the systems. So from an open side, that is a huge part. And then there's the role of the integrators in that, right? Who are going to need to create the environments and the atmospheres where the different components can come together, so that we can validate that we can interop right through that. And then there's the other element is the operators and service providers themselves. They've got to provide encouragement to the players in the ecosystem and the product vendors to move that direction and to continue to work through those challenges that come with open networking and continue to integrate. And there's a time element to this and effort that has to go into it. So I think that's where we are now. Where does automation? Certainly anything we can do to automate through the testing and integration phase, that helps us accelerate the deployment there. So that's kind of like the back end. But I think on the next level, once we have the interfaces set and we have the platforms in place, then the applications on top that are going to really bring the value from the network are going to drive more of that automation. They're going to take advantage of that automation to be able to implement new use cases, whether it's improving efficiency of the network or whether it's delivering a new service to the end user for the network. But a lot of those apps on top, they'll be able to take advantage and implement that automation. And that's where we're going to see the big value come in.
Absolutely. So do you see, okay, so actually, first question, do you think that if you have two operators, one having an open RAN, disaggregated to some extent, network, versus one that is vertically integrated, traditional RAN, do you think there is going to be a difference in terms of the opportunity for integration, for automation right now? So is it going to be easier if you have a single vendor controlling everything?
To implement automation?
Mm-hmm. To automate your network.
You would think that it's like there's going to be fewer points in the path, right, that you've got to validate for the automation spec. But maybe the downside is you're going to be limited to what that vendor offers and what their capabilities are, right? Part of the reason to move to open is that you can take advantage of the additional features or capabilities of the other vendors, and that would unlock new automation there. But if you're going from a strictly proprietary vendor implementation versus a more open implementation, I think you'll see some differences in the ability to implement automation. And I think what service providers will do is they'll take it in steps, right? And maybe I'm not going to have a different vendor at every level from, whether it's my, radio, CUDU, RIC, SMO, it's probably like, I'm going to pick a point right now where I'm going to draw the line. And below here, I probably have this vendor, and above here, I have this. And then I'll figure out where the next elements. And I think that's a good approach, right? And then you can become, more open over time, or add more vendors over time as you go. But where do you want to start, I think, is the question. And we've seen different implementations from different vendors of where they're kind of like through the stack. They kind of draw that open versus maybe closed or more single vendor line. So it hasn't really coalesced around what the best approach is, and maybe there won't be. Maybe we'll just see different operators take different approaches.
Yeah, and I think it's really fascinating to see how that is going to be working in practice. And as you said, we're learning, we're sort of building. So as operator become more disaggregated, or their networks become more disaggregated, the more you can experiment with different things. Because, so for instance, if you have automation, like with basically how you operate your network, is it going to be more multiple solutions from each vendor, or have more at the system integration level? So, yeah. And I guess for different operators, it's going to be different, but it's going to be interesting to see how it develops, because we really, I guess as an industry, mm-hmm. Everybody's learning at this point, right? So we don't yet have everybody that claims to have the answer, I think, is, well, I wish they did, but I think that we sort of still have, we're still learning, and that's actually the fascinating bit of this process.
Yeah, we're absolutely learning, and the key, I think, is to get out there and get engaged, and as vendors, we need to get engaged in customer labs and trials, and we need to go with other partners and other vendors where we're going to see it, because we're not going to learn all of these elements until we get out there and actually do it. I think to some extent, the past few years have kind of been theory in some ways, right? Everybody's building, but we haven't, need to get to the point now where we're practicing and implementing that. And I think that learning aspect is really exciting. We've seen, lots of we're seeing lots of questionnaires and RFIs come out around it. They're asking questions about automation related to their ORAN and SMO and RIC. And we've had several requests recently to start to get engaged in lab trials that, they're asking to, let's get the software into the lab. We want to start to evaluate it. Initial asks have kind of been, hey, just bring your stuff, Fujitsu. Let's start there, right? And then we'll lay out some phases for the way we want to approach these. And then later phases, we start to bring in different vendors and have interface points. So I mean, this is how it starts, right? This is how we start to learn. And I think it's going to move really quickly once we start to get kind of down to the practical piece here.
So I just like to remind the audience that that's the time to ask questions. You're very quiet today. Usually we have the opposite problem, and there are so many questions we cannot even go through our topics. But so don't be shy. Ask questions, but don't wait until the end. What I wanted to ask you about again you mentioned what you hear from operators, and they ask you more to come in and do tasks. But I remember at the beginning when you talk about automations a few years ago, some years ago, operators, the fear and worry was the dominating factor. Like maybe it's useful, but then we're not doing it, we don't lose control. There was still clearly there is an element to that as we talked about earlier. But what do you hear? What is that operators really want to do with automation? What is it they're looking for when they talk to you? What kind of features, what kind of requirements they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the last few years, and I think automation is coming more and more into the wireless network. I think we saw a lot of it in kind of the data centers, really, like 5 or 6 years ago, and SDN became very prominent there and took off. Speaking from some of my experience on the optical network side, it was, a lot of it was, two areas, or I guess a few areas you can break it down into. There's kind of the commissioning stage, right? The provisioning stage, and then the operation stage. And so areas to automate. So commissioning is getting a new, getting a new node into the network. You need to provide that initial configuration so that it's set up. We've called it like zero touch provisioning. You'll hear that term brought up a lot. And we've worked on that. We've made a lot of advancements in that on the optical side at Fujitsu in use cases. The next step is to commission the node. So you need to validate that it's operating properly, monitor the performance metrics, and then put it online, essentially, right? So that's the second step from that. And then the third is in operations. And this is kind of maybe day-to-day operations, and a lot of it is around, on the optical side, is setting up a new service or service provisioning and automating that element. Now, I think we'll bring these concepts, right, as we move up, as we address other domains of the network. And I don't think you have to start in one specific area. You can kind of come at all of them in early stages, and then build on it, right? So you sort of start at a basic level in both your commissioning, provisioning, and operations phase, and then you continue to add more levels of automation sort of in each of those 3 different verticals. So I think those are the areas that we see customers asking for automation in, and we've seen different requests from it just takes me too long to get new nodes and I've got a huge project and build out. Can you help me accelerate that? To the testing that I go through once I get a node online takes me days and it's very tedious and redundant. Could we automate that, right? So those are just some examples.
Yeah, and I guess it makes sense that it would be like, if something doesn't create a problem, why fix it? It's where you see that at some point you can cope with it, or it's just really massively inefficient.
Mhm.
Because if you know that, yeah, things could be better, but that's always the case, right? So there is less of a sense of urgency because change is always painful, not just expensive, So if you can keep things as they are, keep them, but then at some point you just have to go ahead and do it. Do you notice any difference in terms of small versus large operators or different areas, say North America, Europe, Asia, other countries?
Yeah, let's talk small versus large operators. I think the biggest difference to me is like interest in doing it themselves. So from a large operator, like if we go talk AI or a new AI or ML solution with a small operator, it's more about how hard, how difficult is this going to be for me to adopt it? How do I implement it and see value to this really quickly? And we're talking to the person who's probably going to be using the product, right? Whose day-to-day is going to be operating it. When we go to a larger operator and we bring up the same topic, then we have a room of like data scientists, right? And developers maybe, who are comparing what you're doing to kind of what they're doing. So I think that's a big difference when we talk to different operators and what the approach is. Some are, what can you, smaller ones are, what can you do to help me and how can it accelerate it? If it's going to be a big lift, I don't know right now. Whereas the big ones are like, well, we're looking at this too. So how's what you're doing different from what we're doing?
Yeah, so there is different. What about geographic location?
Uh, Geographically, from the automation side, I don't know if geography plays as big of a difference there. I tend to see more the size of if you look at the big operators in North America versus Europe, I think like similar conversations, but who's at what stage in the decision-making process is different. And then there's like a difference in evaluation, how long, we're going to evaluate. I think like European providers tend to be very forward-looking and they're eager to get their hands on the latest technology and get it in the lab. But that cycle from bringing into the lab to getting into production is longer than I would expect. Like with a North American operator, they may delay it, not make a decision as soon, but once they make the decision, they're going to want to move faster. So those are some of the differences we've seen geographically.
It actually sounds right. I never thought about it that way, but it does resonate well with with what you hear that is different. We do have a question from the audience from Igor, and the question is about SON. SON was supposed to be a magic solution for wireless network optimization, and he thinks that it largely failed in that role. And do you think that AI will be different?
Yeah, I think that the SON question also kind of comes to like 5G adoption. Those are like linked questions. I've looking at analyst reports for like Open RAN and 5G adoption, there's like, here was our prediction in 22 and here was 20, and it's just kind of slipped. And so some of that actually speaks to the success of SON, right? It's, maybe it wasn't a magic bullet, but it's out, it's deployed, it's working. And what's going to drive the operators to move off of that technology to the next technology? is that like a killer app or use case, or, some of that's been the challenge with 5G is like, where is that? It's got to be something besides just more bandwidth, right? To really drive that adoption and that transition, or we'll just make the transition through our normal, normal network upgrade process. So will it be different with AI? I don't think AI is going to be a replacement. I think AI could be integrated with a lot of the SON that we're doing. I think 5G and that architecture that comes from Open RAN is going to be a better enabler. Certainly, if we can get, as I said, to the standardized interfaces, and now we have an ecosystem of developers who can come in, then we can really take advantage, and we'll see more adoption and more use cases and more applications that are based on AI ML. But to some extent, SON still works today, and I think that has been good for the operators, but not that it has slowed the 5G adoption, but it's allowed them to sort of stay with their existing technology.
Absolutely. What about REC, in the evolution of SON and AI?
Where does RIC fit?
REC, yeah. I mean, is that going to be, a replacement or with respect to SON?
Architecturally, it will be the replacement. RIC will come in, it will replace SON. We'll see RIC and like service orchestration or SMO applications that will address that. It's going to be the replacement. I think we see from all of our competitors, even the SON vendors, they're making that transition. Some SON vendors are getting away from SON and moving just more to apps, right? A lot of the applications and functionality built on SON will now need to transition to the 5G network, where it can be deployed on a RIC and use like standard interfaces like R1 as an example. So RIC is going to have a key element here. It's going to be a battleground for the vendors who are playing in this space. I mean, having your RIC be deployed pervasively is going to be important, and that means building an ecosystem of app vendors, because that's really what will drive the value. How many apps and how many capabilities can I take advantage of by deploying a certain vendor RIC, as an example. So RIC's
Now,
going to be.
let me ask you a question about energy efficiency, because if there is a use case which seems to be the easiest to grasp, it has to be energy efficiency, because it's really hard to increase energy efficiency by having people just switching on and off radios
Right.
manually. If you don't have automation, it's really hard to imagine how you can actually get advantage of it. And it's relatively simple. I mean, well, I don't want to understate the issue, but it's kind of, it seems like it's a good place to add automation without too much risk or complexity. It seems like it's
Yeah.
I would say that that's the best case that I can think of, but maybe you disagree with it. Or how important do you think it is to the energy efficiency, on one hand, to maybe get operators to trust automation because it's a simpler case, or how important it is, because in terms of cost savings, that could be pretty big as well.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of interest here. It's a big discussion. There are multiple players around energy efficiency and building applications, our applications, right, in the ORAN architecture that'll address mobile network energy efficiency. Obviously driven in Europe a lot from the governments and legal requirements. In the US, it's a cost savings. Just the cost savings is really big in North America that we've seen. There are different ways to do it and different levels that you can approach. There's sort of like a cell specific level that you can come at the problem from, and that's probably the quickest way to implement that technology. And whether it's putting radios to sleep, or off to generate that. The other, you can take a more of a network level, but it requires more data to drive that. You're looking at some of the drive test data that you need to really understand the full the wireless environment that you're working in. It has kind of become like an early implementation where we can sort of implement some of this automation, even add in some of that machine learning technology there that's analyzing and assessing the best way. We've had some interest. Another element to the energy savings is the quality of service and quality of experience that come from it. So in addition to just saving the energy, what's the impact on the network and on the user? We've had some really interesting discussions where going beyond just like setting a base threshold and just saying, I don't want to impact my customer experience at all, but maybe setting a tier to it, like, well, for this set of users, I would allow this much impact, right? And for this set of users, I would allow this much, but for this set, I will allow no impact to their quality of service. So, and then weighing the trade-offs between what's my energy savings and what's the impact to certain users' quality of service or quality of experience. So that kind of gets to like two more levels, right, of what you could do with energy savings. But I think from the service provider's perspective, it allows them to offer additional services or find where they further expand their cost savings, or tier their customers differently. But that kind of flexibility is what we're hearing from some of the service providers, what they're asking for.
And some of these topics that you mentioned are really interesting because it's not just reducing power in absolute terms, is how to do it without having any impact. So how to basically do it for free without having any downside of it, or controlling whatever kind of impact you have on performance. That's what I talked in my interview with Rob. Now, also, this brings another topic which comes up all the time when you talk about AI, Gen AI, or automation, and it's like, can operator monetize it? Now, monetizing means both reducing the cost and increasing revenues. So, but how should we think about it in terms of the monetization opportunity that it all brings?
Yeah, some of the recent discussions around network APIs, I think, are really interesting. I mean, with working in network control software, what has our kind of direction been for the last 6 years? It's been, okay, we'll save you money, but what are the network providers? They need new revenue ideas, just to your point, right? I think that the network API concept is a really interesting one that will lead to a new revenue stream for the operators. I mean, there's so much data available in a mobile network, and making that available to enterprises, and I don't know, it could be retail stores or hotel chains or financial institutions, that if they can get access to that data and access to the network, then they'll utilize that to build new applications. They'll pay for the right to access the APIs, and I think we'll see new services come out of that. But I think that's an exciting area, and we've seen some of the big players making some moves in network API. But I think that's exciting from the monetization space of the network. I think there's big questions of how big it could be. Is this just like a kind of a side stream, but pales in comparison to the normal rates and service providers, or does it become something bigger than that? I think it's yet to be seen, but we're seeing some big moves in that direction. I think it's really interesting. As a software guy, I think it's what could we do with that data now that we have access to the network is very exciting.
Absolutely, and yeah, there is a huge amount of interest, and I guess it's just it's kind of a reflection of our ability to use a lot of data that's always been there, a lot of things have always been there, but we're not being able to really use to our advantage. So I think that, in general, the industry will a lot of money on the table in terms of there's so much more that we could do with existing networks that we are. Now, we have another question here from Aaron, and it's about using GenAI to create a mirror virtual network that we can apply the parameters to it and evaluate the performance changing for optimization purposes. And it just sounds like digital twins to me.
Yeah.
But then would you use GenAI or just use AI? So does the question make sense?
So how would GenAI or AI help in like building a virtual mirror, or
Let me read it again. Let me read you the question, the full test. Can GenAI be used to create a mirror virtual network, and can we apply the parameters to it to evaluate the performance changes for optimization purposes? Do you think this can be a use case to apply GenAI to radio networks?
Let me just start with kind of virtual networks or digital twin. I mean, this seems like a fantastic application for telecommunications. I mean, digital twin can be applied across lots of industries, but then you can just really see the value if you can replicate and have a digital mirror of your network. Now think about the different layers of that and what's involved, right? If it's a wireless network, you have to understand the environmental conditions, and literally where buildings are placed, right? That could impact performance. On an optical network, you need to know where your fiber splices are and how they impact the data rate. So in my experience with this, it's like you can really see the value in having this. I think the big challenge, and maybe to what the question is going to, is how do you collect, build, organize? How do you build that digital twin? Where does the data come from? How do you get access to it? How do you keep it up to date? That might be the hardest one. If you get it built once and now you got to update it and keep it up to date in real time, because if it's not, then it doesn't have the same amount of value, right? It has to be updated and supported in real time. Maybe that's where AI comes in, is in some of that updating, or is it initial building that we can analyze the network? Now, we've done some work where we'll set up, we can monitor performance of established links and services, and we can use that to predict like if we add another service in that same spectrum, what the impact is going to be. Could we increase our throughput on one frequency versus another? And so that's some of the areas kind of related to where we're going with digital twin that we've used AI and machine learning to be able to optimize a network there. So I think it has a role to play. Maybe one area is how that data gets collected and built. To me, is an open question, and it's going to take a lot of work, right, from where I stand today, to build the initial digital model and then to maintain it. But then I think you can put the AI and ML on top, really, right, to derive the benefit from it. I don't know. That's a really good question. I like that one. There's a lot of layers to it.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, I think as you point out, the question is, well, how to build and maintain the network, which is kind of like a question about, you can have the best model, but if your data is not reliable and it's not accurate, it's not good data, then you end up with something that is not accurate and not reliable. And so that's kind of beyond what you have in terms of so the model is essential, but if your data is not good, it doesn't matter how good the model is, you're not going to get what you want. So I think that you point out a real challenge that we have. So it's not just if you want to use AI and AI, the question is that, can you trust the data you have? So we have 1 minute left, so let me ask you a final question. How do you see your job from Fujitsu side evolving now that, you know, we have all this interest? How do you see, you think you're just going to do the same, more of the same, or is it new directions that you are going to explore in the future?
Yeah, I think we're at I mean, kind of two things that we're working on at Fujitsu. One is, you know, the two topics we've hit on today, right, where we put a lot of emphasis from our direction with AI and ML, but I think over the next few years, it's going to be what are those key use cases, and it's going to be a step by step, like an iterative. Hey, here's a new problem we can solve. Let's develop confidence in that. Now let's move to the next one. What's the next challenge? I'm always listening to my customers. I'm presenting maybe one solution and product, but in those conversations, we hear about what the other challenges are, right? And so what's the next problem I can solve for you? And I think this is like, we're going to build it one little block at a time. I've solved this problem for you. Now I'm going to automate and solve that problem. And it's going to be kind of these very targeted use cases that you see early value from, and one after the other, right? And over time, we'll see that we get to closed loop automation and we get to where we really see the value of AI, ML. But I don't think it's like this year we're not using AML and next year AML is everything. It's going to be like, solve some specific use cases for me, show me specific value, and address these. So that's where a lot of the focus from my team, and I'm always like, guys, keep listening. I know you're pitching one product, but listen for what that other challenge is at the customer, because that's our next, right? That's our next one, that next building block that we're going to implement.
Yeah, I really like this approach. You have to keep your eyes and ears tuned onto the customer and see what is that you can do, because we need to be able to capture that. Well, Blake, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with all of us, and thank you all in the audience. And Kendra, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Monica. That will conclude our webinar for today. Thanks again to our speakers and the audience. A recording of today's webinar will be available at senseofeely.com in the coming days, so you can rewatch it there. And we have an upcoming Sparring Partners on April 3rd. Registration for that is also available at senseofeely.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.